It was Greg Sheridan who said that Scott Morrison should give the Gabfest in Glasgow in November a wide berth. His words, quote, "Stay home, Prime Minister. Don't go near it. It has the political appeal of a holiday in Hawaii in the bushfires season. All the upside of a guest appearance on the ABC's Q&A with an audience of inner-city greenies." I suppose only one question has to be answered.
That's such identity politics. Like, holy shit.
With climate change and the impoverishment it will bring to their way of life. Boris Johnson has taken up the cause, hook, line and sinker. Here we see Liberals like Matt Keane and Gladys Berejiklian advocating this nonsense. Janet Daly bells the cat, and I quote, "The chief objective of 20th century democracy was to equalise the living conditions and economic opportunities of entire populations. Whatever your view," she says, "of the urgency of climate change, it's critically important to recognise," she writes, "that many of the steps now being proposed to deal with what is considered to be a global emergency are designed precisely to reverse that progress." She's right. Now remember, in November, everybody who's anybody will be on a junket to Glasgow with all the problems of the world, but they'll be talking about climate change. The godfather of climate change is a bloke by the name of Maurice Strong. He's now dead. A Canadian businessman.
I'm sorry, the way he's like, he's now dead. Like, contextual reminder, the Australian bushfires that happened in 2019, just before COVID, there are strong links that more or less prove that a lot of the reason those bushfires occurred was because of the changing climate. Like, it's a pretty big fucking deal. Like, all the problems of the world, climate change is a pretty big fucking problem.
And an oil and mineral billionaire. He was president of the Power Corporation of Canada. He got the United Nations bug and was credited with forming the United Nations Environment Programme. We live with his legacy today. But in 1992, he said, and I quote, "We may get to them."
Is this going to be one of those things where they look at someone that is credited with like the early days of a movement, and then on their deathbed or something, they like recant? As if that, it's like that thing you hear with Charles Darwin sometimes, that despite the fact that he did the, he established natural selection, like you hear religious people sometimes claim that on his deathbed he recants and like says it's all false and God's the creator and stuff, which is bullshit. Is that what we're about to be fed?
Point where the only way of saving the world will be for industrialised civilization to collapse. Isn't it our responsibility to bring this about? 1992. When he died in 2015, Quadrant magazine here wrote an article.
He was just a doomer about it, and there are a lot of climate scientists that are a doomer.
About him, the godfather of climate change. In the opening paragraph, the Quadrant magazine said this, and I quote, "The consummate sleazebag thief, an all-round corruptocrat who launched and shaped the UN effort to rid the world of carbon dioxide has died, appropriately enough, as his heirs gather in Paris to rob the world blind. Good riddance," unquote. We're told, aren't we, to listen to the experts, listen to the science? Well, Professor Stephen Schneider was the lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports of 2001 and 2007. He was the Stanford Professor of Climatology. He died in 2010. He said of global warming, and I quote, "We need to get some broad-based support to capture the public's imagination, so we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified..."
Stephen Schneider. I mean, that's probably close enough to get him. Oh no, that's... Here we go, research. Wikipedia. Professor of Environment, Ecology and Global Change. That sounds right. All right, so let's see if we can find this quote. So one of my friends, Mama Atheist, who's in the chat sometimes, she is a climate scientist, and she's very doomer about it, I have to say. Here we go. Climate sites. The Schneider quote. Dr. Stefan Schneider of Stanford University is well respected, blah, 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 blah. You've also seen the following quote attributed to him. On the one hand, as scientists, we are ethically bound to the scientific method. On the other hand, we're not just scientists, but human beings as well. To do that, we need to get some broad-based support to capture the public's imagination. That, of course, means getting loads of media coverage. So we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified, dramatic statements, and make little mention of any doubts we might have. Each of us has to decide what the right balance is between being effective and being honest. So when I first saw this quote in a YouTube comment, I mean, here we're seeing it on a news station, I assumed it was completely fabricated, but then I did a Google search on the exact quote and found thousands of hits. Still, they were all from either blogs or newspaper editorials, which are quite low on credibility. I wrote an email to Dr. Schneider asking if he could quickly explain where the quote came from, even though he's probably been asked about it countless times. I found that university professors, even those like Dr. Schneider, who are undoubtedly busy, are quite good about answering email. As long as you're polite and show genuine interest, yada, yada, yada. You've guessed right, he wrote. It's a major misquote. Leaving out the last sentence, leaving out the context, it is all explained in the meteorology section of my website. Those who are really interested in the story are welcome to go and read the explanation, but I'll summarize it quickly here for the rest of us. In a 1988 interview with Discover magazine, Dr. Schneider was explaining how the media does not give climatologists a lot of time to explain anything thoroughly. As a scientist, he has an obligation to include all error and uncertainty measurements in statements like any legitimate scientific report would. But as a human being, he needs to convey his message to the public in the couple of sentences journalists allow him. This was the original quote. Excellent. Excellent. On the one hand, as scientists, we are ethically bound to the scientific method, yada, yada, yada. On the other hand, we're not just scientists, but human beings as well. And like most people, would like to see the world a better place, which in this context translates into our working to reduce the risk of potentially disastrous climate change. To do that, we need to get some broad-based support to capture the public's imagination. That, of course, means getting loads of media coverage. So we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified, dramatic statements, and make little mention of any doubts we might have. This double ethical bind we frequently find ourselves in cannot be solved by any formula. Each of us has to discover what the right balance is between being effective and being honest. I hope that means being both. With the full quote, it's easy to see that Dr. Schneider was attacking, not supporting, the soundbite system. But an attack editorial from the Detroit News selectively cut out part of the above quote, publishing the following. Interesting. So we have, with basically one Google search, or two Google searches. One to find the scientist. Two, we just added scary. So we would find reference to the quote. And we have the truth. Although, let's be completely fair, right? So this is still a secondary source. Let's go to the source. Oh, damn it, not found. This was 12 years. You're getting old when you are going through the internet and links are broken. All right, so, whoops, Discord there. I need to be more careful when I'm sharing my screen. So let's see if maybe they do give the quote the correct context. Let's find out.
Dramatic statements and make little mention of any doubts. Each of us has to decide what the right balance is between being effective and being honest. Christine.
What's that meme? Got him. Fucking, they're just fucking liars. And like, this is what I just cannot wrap my head around. Is that like, I know people that I believe to be intelligent people. I believe that they are well-intentioned people, but they believe this. They look at this and they are unable to actually deconstruct the lies, the misinformation, the, like, not clip chimping, the cherry picking of quotes like that. Like we just can immediately debunk like that quote. Like as if one of the premier climate scientists from the 80s and 90s was saying we need to lie about climate change to get on the news, which is not the case. It's not the quote. It's not accurate. It's insane.
Stewart, the former Canadian Minister for the Environment, said, quote, "No matter if the science of global warming is all phony, climate change provides the greatest opportunity to bring about equality and justice in the world," unquote. And what about the Emeritus Professor of Ecology?
See, how many of these quotes should I look up? We've debunked
At the
one.
University of Santa Barbara, Daniel Botkin, who said in 2007 in a Wall Street Journal article, the only way to get our society to truly change is to frighten people at the possibility.
All right, let's do another one. Daniel Botkin, frighten climate change. It was it the Wall Street Journal? All right, so what's the quote?
The only way to get our society
Frighten catastrophe. All right, so the only way to get out of our
to truly change.
to get our society to truly change. All right. Control F. All right. All right. I've already red flag here. Some of my doubts. So they're not talking about their convictions. They're talking about their doubts here. Okay, we know where we're looking for the quote. All right. Some colleagues who share some of my doubts argue that the only way to get our society to change. So this is something that Botkin himself is reporting that others have said. He's not reporting it as his belief. He's reporting that others, some colleagues who share some of his doubts, argue this. Not that his doubts have led him to this. Anyway. The only way to get our society to change is to frighten people with the possibility of a catastrophe, and therefore it is all right and even necessary for scientists to exaggerate. They'll tell me that my belief... Holy shit. Like, come on. Like, you've got to be shitting me.
Change is to frighten people at the University of Santa Barbara, Daniel Botkin, who said in 2007
Daniel Botkin said
in a Wall Street Journal article, the only way to get our society to truly change is to frighten people at the possibility of catastrophe.
He didn't say that. He said the opposite of that. He said that colleagues of his who share his doubts argued that they need to frighten people with the possibility of catastrophe. But then he goes on to say that his belief in open and honest assessment, like his belief is open and honest assessment. Wolves deceive their prey, don't they? One said to me recently. Therefore, biologically, he said, we were justified in exaggerating to get society to change. This is sociopathic, like professors, like in their ivory tower talking shit to each other. Like, the climate model is to develop the computer programs that are being used to forecast climate change, used to readily admit that the models were crude and not very realistic, but were the best that could be done with available computers and programming methods. They said our options were either to believe those crude models or believe the opinions of experienced, data-focused scientists. Having done a great deal of computer modeling myself, I appreciated their acknowledgement of the limits of their methods. But I hear no statements today. What's the... so here's a hack for you when you're at uni or when you're doing some study. So you go to the last... You go to the conclusion. Wait, what the fuck? Faith in science? Okay, so this guy in 2007 was concerned that climate change was being treated with too much urgency relative to habitat destruction by the looks of it. And orangutans. Anyway, so that's another quote that we've completely thrown in the bin.
And don't forget, the founder of the UN Environmental Programme. We may get to the point where the only way of saving the world will be for industrialised civilisations to collapse. Isn't it our responsibility to bring this about? Unquote. If this stuff doesn't frighten you, you mustn't have a pulse. How many of these guys...
Or maybe you've just read it and you know that's not what it says.
Go disciples, whether they be Biden or Johnson or Morrison, have done any homework on this. This stuff is about standing the capitalist free world on its head. Christina
Do that.
Fagiris of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change said in February 2014 in Brussels, and I quote, "This is the first time in the history of mankind that we are setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that's been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution," unquote. So there you are. No matter that Bjorn Lomborg, the Danish author, world authority and visiting professor at the Copenhagen Business School, wrote in 2017, and I quote, The findings from the major climate models are clear. Achieving the 1.5 degrees centigrade target would require nothing less than the entire planet abandoning the use of every single fossil fuel
Do it. No, fuck. I can't be bothered debunking
in less
another
than
one.
4 years, unquote. He said that in 2017. The 4 years is up. And so we're sending, are we, our Prime Minister and a stack of others to Glasgow, when this is the agenda. Christine Stewart, the former Canadian Minister for the Environment, no matter if the science of global warming is all phony, climate change provides the greatest opportunity to bring about equality and justice in the world. In a 2010 interview, the UN Intergovernmental Panel climate change official Ottmar Edenhofer said of the climate change summit in 2010, like this one in Glasgow in November, Ottmar Edenhofer said, and I quote, basically, it's a big mistake to discuss climate policy separate from major themes of globalisation.
That seems fine, because globalization is one of the biggest factors in addressing climate change policy, right? There's no point reducing carbon emissions in one country if they're just being transferred to another country, right? Like there's no point if our manufacturing goes carbon neutral in Australia if we achieve that by manufacturing things in like China or Indonesia or Brazil. So, you know, fine.
The climate summit in Cancun, that's in Mexico, at the end of the month, that was in 2010, is not a climate conference, but one of the largest economic conferences since the Second World War. He said, one has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with environmental policy, he said, anymore. This is about wealth transformation. Ottmar Edenhofer on the Intergovernmental Panel in 2010. But then the public didn't understand. I think they understand now. Look at the vote in Germany. Look at the polls here. Whenever you hear a politician talking net zero, it equals sending the country broke and trashing.
It doesn't. It totally doesn't. That's bullshit.
The life you want your children to enjoy. I've called it for years a national economic suicide note. I haven't changed my mind, and so it is. But the Prime Minister and the modern day Liberal Party, same with Labor, and some parts of the Nationals don't seem to understand this, or even worse, won't speak out against it. Well, may we ask, are our best days behind us? If you think the answer is yes, then the finger of blame must be pointed at politicians, whom we put there, who can't read, can't research, and can't study.
Right, there's a distinct irony there about the cannot read part there. Like, it literally the only way to like put those quotes on the screen is to not be able to read. Like, fucking hell.
But allow themselves to be led by the nose by fairly smart lefties whose agenda was spelt out clearly in 2010 by Ottmar Edenhofer. I repeat, free oneself from the illusion that...
Like, that's just common sense. Like, carbon emissions are a result of economic activities. They're a result of factory work. They're a result of transportation. They're a result of tourism. Like, you can't argue that that's proof that climate change isn't real. Because if climate change is real, then to say that we need an economic system, economic policies in place to address climate change is perfectly logical, rational, reasonable, and sensible.
International climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with environmental policy anymore.
Like, I don't even need to look that quote up because that quote stands on it by itself as it's correct, it is accurate. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you can say climate change isn't real. This doesn't prove it's not real. If you go, well, climate change is real, then it still makes perfect sense. Like, it actually doesn't do anything for his point.
This is about wealth transformation, unquote. Greg Sheridan was outstanding last night. When I spoke to him about this, it was Greg Sheridan who said that Scott Morrison should give the Gabfest in Glasgow in November a wide berth. His words, quote, stay home, Prime Minister. Don't go near it. It has the political appeal of a holiday in Hawaii in the bushfires season. All the upside of a guest appearance on the ABC's Q&A with an audience of inner-city greenies. I suppose only one question has to be answered.
That's such identity politics. Like, holy shit.
Are we all going to allow this to happen?
Yes.
What do you think? Email him.
Do it.
Alan Sky News.
No, I'm not going to email you. Fuck you.